The meeting had been going for 6 hours and nothing had been decided. That was not unusual. The Galactic Concord had been holding meetings like this for 300 years. And in 300 years of meetings, the main thing the Concord had gotten very good at was the meeting itself. The talking, the presenting of data, the formal expressions of concern, the unanimous votes to form smaller committees that would later hold their own meetings. Delegate Oren Vey had attended 412 of these sessions. He had the posture of someone who had been sitting in the same chair for a very long time and had made peace with it. His 6 limbs were folded neatly. His cartilaginous face flat and gray and smooth in the way of his people. The Thylon showed nothing. He had learned long ago that showing nothing was the correct expression for a Concord chamber. It meant you were listening. It meant you were serious. It meant you were not, at this moment, thinking about the fact that 6 star systems had been consumed by the Keth Empire in the past 11 years, and the Concord had responded with 412 meetings. The speaker at the front of the chamber was a Solvani data archivist. She was tall, pale green, and she had been talking for 40 minutes about historical voting records. Her display showed a long column of numbers, 312 years of Concord session logs. Every vote cast by the human delegation, cataloged and color-coded by category: yellow for trade negotiations, blue for territorial disputes, green for diplomatic resolutions. There was almost no red. Red was for military action. The human delegation had voted for military action twice in 312 years. Both times the motion failed anyway. The archivist made her point carefully. She said, the data showed a clear and consistent pattern. She said the human species had moved, over the course of 3 centuries, into what she called a post-conflict orientation. She used the phrase like a compliment, like it was a thing a species graduated into when it had finally grown up enough. She said the human delegation could therefore be expected to support a continued diplomatic approach to the Keth situation, as they had supported every diplomatic approach to every situation for 300 years. She sat down. The chamber murmured with the particular sound of people who had just heard something they already believed confirmed by numbers. Oren Vey looked across the curved rows of delegates to the human section. There were 3 of them. There were always only 3. Ambassador Calder sat in the middle. He was an ordinary-looking man, medium height, medium build, gray at the temples, wearing a suit that fit well enough but not extravagantly. He had a habit of looking at his shoes during presentations, not because he was bored. Oren had watched him long enough to know that, but because he was thinking. He looked at his shoes the way other people looked at the ceiling. Like the floor held something useful. He was looking at his shoes now. He had been looking at his shoes through the entire 40-minute presentation. Oren had known Calder for 11 years. He had never once seen the man use the wrong word, had never seen him arrive late, had never seen him flustered or surprised or even, honestly, very interested. He existed in the Concord chamber with the calm of a man who had already read the ending of the book and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. Oren used to find it reassuring. He was less sure about it today. The session moved to open statements. 6 delegates spoke. They all said variations of the same thing, which was that the Keth expansion was troubling, that the Concord must respond with measured resolve, that dialogue remained the most powerful tool available to a civilized galaxy. The Keth ambassador present via transmission from a ship that was, at this moment, moving through a system. It had no legal right to be in. Listen to all of this, with the expression of a large animal, watching smaller ones arrange themselves. His name was Third Voice Aketh. He was not the decision-maker. That was Grand Arbiter Suveth, who sat further back in the transmission frame, in a chair that was slightly larger than Aketh's, wearing robes that were slightly more decorated, and who had the look of a creature that had never once in its entire life been told no and made to believe it. Aketh spoke when the open statements ended. He used the word times, administrative, times, 11 times. Every occupied system was an administrative realignment. Every displaced population was an administrative transition. Every destroyed station was an administrative incident under review. The Keth were very good at paperwork. They had learned that paperwork, done correctly, could absorb almost anything. Then Suveth leaned forward. He spoke directly. He did not use diplomatic softeners or Concord formal language. He said the outer border territories, the ones that sat between Keth-controlled space and human colonial space, needed to be reclassified as buffer zones for the stability of the region. He said this the way a person says something that is already settled. The way you announce a decision rather than propose one. He called them buffer zones. He said it like they were already his. The chamber went into the particular silence of a room full of people who are surprised but are performing not being surprised. Several delegates began typing. Several others exchanged looks. The Solvani archivist, still seated near the front, let her display quietly go dark. Oren watched the human delegation. Calder looked up from his shoes. It was a small thing. A simple thing. He raised his head and looked at the transmission image of Suveth, and his expression did not change, not the eyebrows, not the set of the jaw, not the line of the mouth, and he said, in a voice that was perfectly moderate and perfectly clear, "We'll see what we can do." That was all. The session moved on. More statements. A proposal to send a formal letter of concern. A vote to form a subcommittee. The ordinary machinery of a Concord meeting turning its ordinary wheels. But Oren kept thinking about those 6 words. We'll see what we can do. They were nothing words. Filler words. The kind of thing you said when you wanted to fill silence without committing to anything. He had heard Ambassador Calder say them before. In smaller rooms. About smaller things. He had never quite noticed, until now, that Calder said them with the same tone every time. Not evasive. Not polite. Patient. Like a man who already knew what could be done and was simply not ready to tell you yet. The corridor outside the main chamber had high ceilings and long windows that looked out over the orbital station's exterior dock. Ships came and went in the dark outside. Mostly, Solvani freighters. A Thailand diplomatic shuttle. The usual traffic of a Concord session week. Oren caught Calder at the water station near the exit. The ambassador was pouring himself a glass of something clear. He did it the way he did everything, without fuss, without ceremony. Oren walked up beside him and said, "That phrase you used, we'll see what we can do. What did you mean by it?" Calder looked at him, not surprised to be asked. Not performing patience, the way some diplomats did the theatrical sigh. The deliberate pause meant to signal depth, just simply looking at him, the way you look at someone you have known for 11 years and trust to ask straight questions. Exactly what I said, Calder told him. The Keth just claimed human border space as buffer zones. In open session, in front of 300 delegates. Yes. And your response was 6 words. It was the right number of words for the moment. Oren's hands had started doing the flutter, the small involuntary vibration in his secondary limbs that Thailand developed when they were trying to process something their brain was not yet ready to file correctly. He pressed them flat against his sides. Calder. We have been partners in this chamber for 11 years. I have watched humanity vote for dialogue and patience, and measured response for 3 centuries of records. The Keth just told you to your face that they intend to take your border. What are you going to do? Calder finished pouring his water. He picked up the glass. He looked out the long window at the ships, moving in the dark. Ask me again in 20 years, he said, and he walked away down the corridor, his ordinary shoes making quiet sounds on the floor. Unhurried, the way a man walks when he has somewhere to be, and is not late. That night, ship night, the Concord station ran on an artificial 2-4-hour cycle. Oren sat in his quarters and pulled up everything he could find on humanity's current military status. It was not hard to find. It was all public. The Concord kept a military registry for all member species, updated quarterly. Humanity's entry was modest. 34 active combat vessels, mostly patrol class. 12 orbital defense platforms across their colonized systems. Standard armament. Nothing remarkable. They had not commissioned a new warship in 40 years. Their defense budget had been declining for 6 decades, reinvested into medical research, which the Concord had noted in several reports as evidence of a species in the mature phase of civilizational development. Evolved past war. That was what the Solvani archivist had said, basically. Oren looked at the numbers for a long time. Then he thought about Calder's face when Suveth said times buffer zones. He tried to match the face to the numbers. It did not match. He could not say why. He told himself it was tiredness. He had been in sessions for 6 hours and his joints ached in the way of Thailand who sat in chairs designed for bipedal species. He told himself that Calder was simply a calm man, and calm men did not always mean something by being calm. He filed his daily report to the Thailand Diplomatic Commission. He wrote that the session had produced no resolution. He wrote that the Keth were escalating. He wrote that the human delegation had been present and engaged. He did not write what he was actually thinking, because he was not sure what he was actually thinking. He lay down in his bunk and looked at the ceiling. He thought, "Ask me again in 20 years." He had heard Calder say that phrase 11 times in 11 years. He had tracked them, vaguely, without meaning to. Some people have phrases they return to. Verbal furniture, things they carry because they are comfortable. Oren had assumed that was what it was. He had not, until tonight, thought to count how long Calder had been saying it. He pulled up his personal correspondence archive. Old messages, years back. He searched Calder's name, filtered by that phrase. It appeared in messages going back 40 years. 40 years of times ask me again in 20 years. Said to different people, in different rooms, about different things, always in the same tone, always with the same patience. Oren lay in the dark for a while, his secondary limbs very still now, the flutter gone, replaced by something quieter and less easy to name. He thought, patience is just waiting when you have nothing. Then he thought, unless you have something. Then he thought about what kind of something a species might have that it kept quiet about for 40 years. He did not get an answer that night. He did not get a good answer for another 3 years. 3 years moved the way years always move in the Concord in meetings, in memos, in formal expressions of concern. The Keth took 2 more systems. The Concord formed 3 more subcommittees. Humanity voted for dialogue each time. Calder retired. He was replaced by Ambassador Senna, who was younger, and who had the same quality. Calder had that unreadable steadiness, that patience worn like a second skin. She attended sessions, voted consistently for measured response, and said things like, "We believe in the process," with a face that gave you nothing. Oren watched her the way he had watched Calder. He was not sure what he was looking for. He found himself, in his private hours, going back to the public military registry, checking humanity's numbers. They never changed much. Patrol ships, defense platforms, a modest fleet by any standard. Nothing that explained the look on Calder's face, or now Senna's face, when the Keth said things that should have terrified them. He started, very quietly, asking questions, not official questions. He had been in diplomacy long enough to know that official questions about military matters went through 17 layers of bureaucracy and came back as non-answers dressed in formal language. He asked the kind of questions you asked over meals, in corridors, in the small talk at the edges of sessions. He asked a Solvani analyst who specialized in human affairs whether she thought humanity was genuinely pacifist or whether it was strategy. She said genuinely pacifist, without hesitation. The data was clear, she said. The data was 300 years of voting records. He asked a Velhari military theorist whether there was any known scenario in which a species could project false military data to the Concord registry. The theorist laughed at him, not unkindly. Invented the whole fleet, you mean? 300 years of fake entries? Nobody has the patience for that, he said. And what would be the point? You'd have to actually build something eventually for it to mean anything. Oren nodded and said yes. Of course. He was just thinking out loud. He thought about the word times eventually. He thought about what eventually meant to a species that had been saying times ask me again in 20 years, times for 4 decades. He thought about Jupiter. He had done a standard diplomatic tour of the human solar system 8 years ago as part of a Concord cultural exchange. They had not gone near Jupiter. The tour guide, pleasant, thorough, full of historical facts about the human home system, had explained that Jupiter's deep magnetosphere was not safe for civilian vessels at that time due to ongoing atmospheric research. Atmospheric research. Oren had written it down in his tour notes. He had not thought about it again until now. He pulled up his tour notes. Atmospheric research, he had written. He stared at those 2 words for a long time. Then he filed them next to times. Ask me again in 20 years. Times and times. We'll see what we can do. Times. And the face of every human ambassador he had ever watched sit quietly in a Concord chamber while something terrible was said. Something was in there. A pattern. A shape he could not quite see the edges of. 3 weeks before the Keth Ninth Vanguard crossed into human border space and disappeared, Oren ran into Ambassador Senna at the water station outside the main chamber. He had taken to positioning himself there. It was a habit now. She poured her water. She looked at him with Calder's eyes, that particular human look of knowing more than is being said. He asked her, directly, "Are you afraid of the Keth?" She considered the question. "No," she said. "You should be. They have taken 8 systems. They have the largest active fleet in this region of the galaxy. I know what they have," she said. Simple. Flat. Not dismissive. Certain. He looked at her. She looked at him. She was drinking her water without hurrying. "What do you have?" he asked. She smiled. It was a small smile. Not warm, not cold, not proud. The smile of someone who has been carrying a very large and very heavy thing for a very long time and can finally see the table where they are going to put it down. She didn't answer him. She walked away down the corridor, her shoes quiet on the floor. 3 weeks later, the Ninth Vanguard crossed the border, and then the galaxy stopped being what it had been. The Ninth Expansion Vanguard had never lost a ship. That was not a boast. It was a fact. The same way the mass of a star is a fact, or the temperature of a furnace. The Ninth had been operational for 63 years. It had participated in 11 territorial expansions, 4 forced colonial absorptions, and 1 full planetary siege. It had emerged from all of them intact. Its commander, Fleet Lord Greveth, kept the record on a small metal plate mounted beside his operations console. 63 years. Not one hull lost. He looked at that plate every morning. Not from pride. Exactly. From the same reason a builder looks at a wall he constructed to confirm it is still standing. That the work was real. That it holds. The crossing into human border territory was not classified as a military operation. It had a different name. In the official Keth expansion registry, it was logged as a navigation survey, Class 4, a standard procedure used when the Empire needed to assess a region for future administrative integration. Class 4 surveys happened all the time. They sent a fleet, rather than a single ship, because the region was large. Not because anyone expected resistance. There was nothing to resist with. Greveth knew the human military numbers the same way everyone in the Keth officer class knew them. 34 patrol vessels, 12 orbital platforms. Modest, quiet. The fleet of a species that had decided, somewhere along the way, that the galaxy was basically safe and they did not need very much to protect themselves from it. He was not arrogant about this. He was just accurate. The survey fleet crossed the border marker at 0300 station time, 12 ships in formation, the 9th's standard survey configuration. Greveth sat in his command chair and watched the navigation display update in real time as they moved deeper into the zone. Stars on the display. Distance markers. The usual texture of empty space, which was mostly empty and occasionally punctuated by something that needed cataloging. He had a cup of something warm. He drank it. He looked at the plate beside his console. 63 years. He thought. 64 soon. The sensor officer's name was Sevik. She was young for her rank 31, which in Keth military terms meant she had moved fast, which meant she was good, which meant Greveth had requested her specifically for the 9th 3 years ago. She was good because she was careful. She did not report things until she had checked them twice. Some officers reported first and checked later, which was faster but produced a lot of noise in the data. Sevik checked first, and the result was that when she reported something, it was real. She ran her calibration sequence at 0340. Then she ran it again at 0341. Then she sat very still for approximately 90 seconds, which Greveth noticed because Sevik did not sit still. She was a small, quick-moving creature by nature, always adjusting something, always cross-referencing something else. 90 seconds of stillness was wrong. He said her name. She turned to look at him. Her face had the specific quality of a person who is choosing, very carefully, the order of words before they say them. "Fleet Lord," she said. "Long-range sensors are reading 11 large mass signatures. Bearing 274, distance approximately 40 light minutes." "Define large," he said. She told him. He did not react visibly. He had not survived 63 years in the Keth military by reacting visibly to things. He said, "Calibration error." I ran it twice, she said. Run it again. She ran it again. The numbers came back identical. The mass signatures sat in the data like stones in shallow water, dense, immovable, impossible to argue with. What is the nearest star to those coordinates? He asked. Nearest star is 4.2 light-years distant, she said. Fleet Lord, those objects are in open space. There is no star. There is no planetary system. There is no... I understood the implication. He put down his cup. He stood up. He walked to the sensor station and looked at her display over her shoulder. The 11 signatures sat on the screen in a loose arrangement, the way a hand of cards might be arranged, not quite in a line, not quite in a cluster. Something between the two. Intentional spacing. The kind of spacing you chose rather than the kind that happened by gravity. Optical, he said. She switched the display to long-range optical. The images were grainy at this distance, assembled from light that had taken 40 minutes to travel, but they were clear enough. 11 shapes in the dark, round at first round the way planets are round, the deep and absolute roundness of something massive enough to pull itself into a sphere. But as the optical resolution sharpened, the roundness became complicated. Structures on the surface, not geological, not the cratered randomness of a natural body. Something built, something that repeated. Towers, or the things that corresponded to towers at this scale, arranged in patterns that only made sense if someone had arranged them on purpose. Those are ships, Savick said. She did not say it dramatically. She said it the way she said everything carefully. After being sure, Greveth looked at the display. He looked at the 11 shapes. He looked at the mass numbers still running in the corner of the screen. He said, "Planets don't have registration marks." "No," she said. "Pull the registration data." She pulled it. It came back fast, because registration data was a simple lookup. Every object in Concord-recognized space carried an ID signal, a basic broadcast, the equivalent of a name tag. Most ships broadcast theirs continuously. These were broadcasting theirs continuously. Had been, presumably, for some time. The signals were just very small against the size of the things broadcasting them. The registration marks were human, all 11 of them. Terran Consolidated Defense. Hull registration numbers that began with the prefix RSP. Greveth did not know what RSP stood for. He would find out later. He would find out that it stood for Rampart Siege Platform. He would find out a great many things later. At this specific moment, he had the registration marks, the mass numbers, the optical images, and the 40-minute-old light showing him 11 structures that his brain was still trying to file under the wrong category. Battle stations, he said, not because he thought it would help, because there was no other order that fit the moment. The 9th moved toward the objects at reduced speed. Greveth wanted more sensor data before he committed to anything. He wanted to understand the shape of the situation before the situation understood him. The objects did not move. This was, he would later think, the first thing that should have told him something. An enemy that moves toward you is reacting to you. An enemy that does not move is not reacting because it does not need to. It is already exactly where it wants to be. At 20 light-minutes distance, the optical images resolved sharply enough to make the stomach do something unpleasant. The smallest of the 11 objects was approximately 7,000 kilometers across. The largest was close to 19,000. For reference, and Savick pulled this reference without being asked, because she was good at her job and understood that context was part of data. The planet, the humans called Earth, their homeworld, was approximately 12,700 kilometers in diameter. The largest of these ships was bigger than the human homeworld. Greveth looked at this information for a long time. He thought about the 63 years on the plate beside his console. He thought about 11 territorial expansions. He thought about the look on every enemy commander's face at the moment they understood what the 9th expansion Vanguard was. That particular look, the collapsing expression, the split second before surrender, he knew it the way a craftsman knows the sound of good work. He thought about human border territory, a navigation survey. Class 4. He opened a transmission to the fleet's other 11 ships. He said, "All vessels hold position. Do not approach further. Do not transmit on open channels. Await my signal." "Oh." He closed the transmission. He looked at Savick. She was already looking at him. He said, "How long would something that size take to build?" She opened her mouth, closed it. He could see her doing the maths in real time. which was not really maths. There were too many unknowns, too many variables, but the approximation, the broad and terrible approximation. Decades, she said, at minimum, depending on materials, workforce, technology. For all 11, she stopped. Say it, he said. A century, possibly 2. Fleetlord, you would need to hollow out moons. You would need entire planetary cores for the raw material. You would need to build inside something inside a gas giant's shadow, inside a magnetosphere strong enough to mask the construction signatures, or the Concorde's long-range surveys would have. She stopped again. Jupiter, Greveth said, and Saturn, and possibly others. Their colonial systems, some of those gas giants are large enough, magnetically active enough. If you knew what you were doing, if you had been planning it long enough. Greveth said nothing for a moment. Then, the Concorde has been doing long-range surveys of human space for 300 years. Quarterly mineral surveys, standard atmospheric readings, traffic monitoring. Yes, Sevik said. But the survey protocols were written before anyone had built a mass displacement field strong enough to mask a structure that size. The Concorde surveys weren't looking for this. Nobody wrote the protocol to look for this because nobody thought. She did not finish the sentence. Nobody thought anyone would do this. Nobody thought any species had the patience to do this. The first power spike registered at 0447. It came from the largest of the 11 objects, the one the registration data listed as RSP-01, immovable. The power signature bloomed on the sensor display like a flower, opening very fast in time-lapse, bright and sudden, and structured, not random, deliberate. The specific electromagnetic fingerprint of a weapon system drawing power, which Sevik recognized because she had seen it on every Keth warship she had ever served on, and because some things look the same no matter what size they are. The scale was different. The scale was the problem. The RSP-01's weapons power draw was equivalent to the entire combined output of all 12 ships in the 9th Expansion Vanguard. Combined. Running. Everything. All at once. That was one weapon. On one ship. Of 11. Fleetlord, Sevik said. Her voice was exactly what it always was. Careful. Precise. The voice of someone who checks twice before she speaks. Greveth had always found it steady. A good sound in a difficult moment. Recommend immediate course reversal. And he was already composing the emergency transmission to the Concorde. He was composing it in his head, finding the right words, the formal language of an official report, the structure that would make someone who was not here understand the weight of what was here. He thought about those words for 11 seconds. He had a talent for words. It was one of the reasons he had made Fleetlord. He could not find the right ones. He typed. In the end, in plain language without the formal headers, there are 11 of them. Human registration. Each one is the size of a world. They are powered and armed, transmitting full sensor telemetry now. We are. The carrier signal died. Not cut. Not blocked in the usual sense of the word. The transmission simply stopped having anywhere to go. The deep space relay they had been routing through was there one moment and then producing no response the next, which was not the same as being destroyed but which meant the same thing in practice. Sevik turned from her console. Her face was doing something he had not seen it do before. Not fear, exactly. Not the obvious kind. The kind that looks like a person suddenly understanding the actual size of a room they thought was smaller. Fleetlord, she said. They've been watching us since we crossed the border. He knew that. He had known it since he saw that the objects were not moving. How long until, he started. The 11 shapes moved. Not fast. Not the darting urgency of a ship in a fight. The way a door opens. The way a tide moves. The unhurried, absolute motion of something too large to need to hurry. Moving because it has decided to move. And the decision was made a long time before this moment. All ships, Greveth said. The last data packet transmitted by the 9th Expansion Vanguard was 17 seconds of sensor telemetry. 11 objects moving in the dark. Mass numbers that were still wrong, even now, even knowing what they were still wrong the way a number is wrong when your brain will not accept it as real. Power readings that made the display throw a calibration warning because the software did not have a scale large enough in its standard range. 17 seconds. Then the carrier signal became static. Then the static ended too. Orenve was in his quarters when the data packet arrived at the Concorde relay station. He was not asleep. though it was ship night. He had not been sleeping well for 3 years. He had developed a habit of sitting at his desk in the dark, reading old reports, looking for the shape of the thing he could not name. His console chimed. Emergency priority. He opened it. The data packet was small. 17 seconds of sensor telemetry from a Keth fleet designation he did not immediately recognize. He ran the ID. The 9th expansion Vanguard. Undefeated, 63 years of operation. Currently on a navigation survey in human border territory. He opened the telemetry. He watched it. He watched it again. By the third viewing, his secondary limbs were doing the flutter hard, uncontrolled, nothing like the managed tremble he usually kept it to. He pressed them flat, and they would not stay flat. By the fourth viewing, he was not looking at the 11 shapes anymore. He was looking at the timestamps. The registration marks were human. That was the obvious thing. The enormous, impossible thing. The thing that would be in every report written about this moment for the next 400 years. But the timestamps, the internal file data, the construction logs embedded in the registration, marks the way a craft writer embeds a signature. The timestamps were old. The oldest hull log he could read in the 17 seconds of data was dated 201 years ago. 201 years. Oren sat in the dark of his quarters and thought about every Concord session he had attended in 40 years. Every human vote for dialogue. Every quiet ambassador with patient eyes. Every Times Ask Me Again in 20 years. He thought about Jupiter. Atmospheric research. He thought about Calder. About Senna. About the expression that was not pride and not fear and not anything he had had a word for until now. He had a word for it now. It was the expression of someone who has been building something for 200 years and has finally, with great patience, finished. He filed the telemetry packet to the Concord emergency channel. He wrote in the subject line, "Human military assets, immediate assessment required." He stared at those words. He deleted them and wrote instead, "We were wrong about the humans." He stared at that too. He sent it without a subject line. He sat in the dark for a long time after, his limbs finally still, looking at nothing in particular, thinking about the distance between quiet and empty, and how long he had confused the two. The Concord chamber had seen many things in 300 years. It had seen the signing of the Outer Reach Accords, which ended a border war that had killed 4 million people across 2 species. It had seen the collapse of the Vethani delegation in the middle of a trade session, a moment so politically catastrophic that the Concord had spent 11 years trying to diplomatically unring that bell. It had seen celebrations and crises and the long grinding machinery of interstellar bureaucracy doing its slow and imperfect work. It had never seen anything like the morning Admiral Yara Solis walked in. She did not use the formal entrance. The formal entrance was on the east side of the chamber, wide and tall, designed for delegations for groups of 3 or 5 or 12, walking in together, with the weight of their species behind them. It had large doors. The doors opened outward, which was a design choice that meant something about welcome, about openness, about the Concord's foundational belief that every member arrived as an equal. Solis came in through the side door. The side door was narrow. It was used by staff, by technicians, by the people who maintained the equipment and refreshed the water stations and made sure the translation systems ran correctly. Nobody who mattered used the side door. It was not a statement. It was simply the nearest entrance to the chamber floor. She walked to the center of the room and stood in the well. The well was the lowest point of the chamber, a circular space maybe 15 meters across, where the most serious things got said. Delegations used it for formal addresses. Mediators used it for binding rulings. It had good acoustics and a full ring of visibility. Every seat in the house could see the well clearly. It was designed so that nothing said there could be missed. She stood in it like she had been there before. She had not. Nobody had checked her credentials at the door. Nobody had handed her a presentation order. She had simply walked in and stood in the well in the chamber, which had been buzzing with the noise of 400 delegates processing the worst intelligence report in Concord history. Went quiet. She was 61 years old. Not tall. Not imposing in any physical way that the word imposing usually implies. Her uniform was Terran Consolidated Defense, gray, plain. No decorations except the rank bars at the collar, and a single small pin above the left breast that nobody in the room could read from their seats. She waited for the room to finish being quiet. Then she put one image on the central display, just one. No title, no header, no presentation markers. One photograph, old, the color palette of a camera that had been doing its job in difficult conditions, high radiation, debris scatter, the kind of light that comes after something has been destroyed rather than before. The image showed a research station, what was left of one, structural frames bent outward in the specific pattern of an internal pressure event, which was the technical description of what happened when something explodes from the inside. Docking arms broken clean off. Habitat modules, the small round rooms where people slept, ate, worked, argued, made coffee, wrote letters home, punctured and dark. Floating near the largest fragment of the station's central hub, visible if you looked at the right part of the image, were shapes that the eye did not want to identify as what they were. The delegates who had been alive 300 years ago went very still. The Velhari delegate, old enough to have read the original incident reports, leaned back in her seat, with the expression of someone who has been tapped on the shoulder from behind and is not yet sure whether to turn around. The younger delegates began searching their archives. 300 years was deep history. The incident had a name, the Fomalhaut Skirmish, Keth Border Patrol, disputed navigation records, closed file. It had a casualty number, 61. It had an official Keth designation, an accidental navigation incident, under administrative review. The review had never concluded. Solis let them look at the image for a long time. Long enough that the people who were searching their archives found what they were looking for. Long enough that the people who already knew what they were looking at had to sit with knowing it. Then she said, 304 years ago, a Keth Border Patrol destroyed a human research station at Fomalhaut. 61 scientists, no military personnel, no weapons platform within 9 light years. The Keth filed it as an accidental navigation incident. The Concord accepted that filing. She paused. We did not. She did not use a podium. She did not use notes. She spoke the way a person speaks when they have said a thing so many times, inside their own head, over so many years, that the words have worn smooth, nothing rough left on them, nothing uncertain. Every word knew where it was going. She said, "What I am about to present is classified under Terran Consolidated Defense Protocol as Project Rampart. It has been active for 201 years. It has been known to no external government, no allied species, and no Concord member body. The information is being declassified now because the operational phase of the project began 11 days ago, when the Keth 9th Expansion Vanguard crossed the human border marker into survey territory." She brought up a second image, hull schematics. Clean, precise. The technical drawings of an engineering team that had been refining the same design for 2 centuries. The shape was roughly spherical, the way all very large things in space tend toward the spherical, but covered in structures, weapons arrays, propulsion banks, docking systems, sensor towers arranged with the dense and total coverage of something that was designed to have no soft side, no angle from which it was not a threat. A scale bar ran along the bottom of the image. The chamber read the scale bar. Several delegates made sounds, not words. The kind of sounds a body makes when the brain is processing something faster than language can keep up with. 11 vessels, Solis said, Rampart-class siege platforms, constructed inside the magnetospheric shadow of Jupiter, Saturn, and 9 additional gas giant bodies across human colonial space. Construction began 201 years ago on the first hull. The 11th hull was completed 4 years ago. She let that sit. The smallest platform in the Rampart fleet is 7,400 kilometers in diameter. The largest RSP-01, currently designated immovable, is 19,200 kilometers. For reference, that is larger than the planet Mars. It is larger than Mars because Mars is where the hull plating came from. The Thailand delegate 3 rows back from Oren Vey made a sharp involuntary sound and then covered its mouth with one limb. Oren did not look at it. He was watching Solis. He had been watching her since she walked through the side door. He could not look away, not because of what she was saying, though what she was saying was the most significant information he had heard in 40 years of diplomatic work, but because of her face. She looked tired, not the tired of a person who had not slept, the tired of a person who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and is now, finally, setting it down. Not relief, Exactly. Something quieter than relief. The feeling after relief, when the hands are empty and the weight is gone, and you have to remember what your arms are for when they are not holding the thing. She had been building this for 39 years. Oren found that out later, not in the chamber, but afterward, in the public record that the Terran government released alongside the technical briefing. Admiral Yara Solis, born Cascadia Coast, Earth. Propulsion engineering degree, age 22. First assignment, systems engineer, Hull 7, Project Rampart. Recruited at 22 by a man whose name the record did not include, described only as a senior project coordinator, who had told her they were building something and it would take a while. She had said yes. She had been 22. 39 years of this. 39 years of Concord sessions attended as a junior advisor, then a senior officer, then a fleet representative, always voting for dialogue and patience and measured response, always with the same quiet face. 39 years of times ask me again in 20 years. 39 years of holding a secret the size of a planet, 11 secrets the size of planets inside a single branch of a single government, shared by the people who needed to know and nobody else. Nobody else. For 200 years. Oren thought about the Solvani analyst who had said, without hesitation, genuinely pacifist, the data is clear. He thought about the Velhari theorist who had laughed at the idea of faking fleet data for 300 years. Nobody has the patience for that, the theorist had said. He had been wrong about the patience. He had been wrong about what it was for. Suvith joined by transmission at the 1-hour mark. He had not been invited. The Concord had sent a formal notification to the Keth diplomatic channel, as protocol required, and Suvith had joined uninvited and unannounced, which was the Keth way of communicating that they did not consider themselves subject to the Concord schedule. His transmission image appeared on the secondary display to the right of the central screen, large and well lit, his robes arranged with the specific care of someone who understands that image is power. He waited for Solis to acknowledge his presence. She did not acknowledge his presence. She was in the middle of a technical description of the Rampart fleet's primary weapon systems, and she continued it without pausing, without looking at his transmission image, without changing her tone by a single degree. He waited another 40 seconds. Then he spoke. Over her. The Keth Empire requires an explanation for the destruction of the 9th Expansion Vanguard. Solis stopped. She looked at his image. The 9th Vanguard was in human territory without authorization, she said. It was assessed as a threat. It was treated as one. And, come, under what Concord mandate? The Concord mandate under which we operate, she said, is the same one under which every member species operates. We are permitted to defend our territory. The 9th Vanguard was in our territory. And the buffer zone designation has no legal standing, she said. You said it in open session 3 years ago. The Concord did not ratify it. We did not ratify it. You saying a thing does not make it true. She said that last sentence the way you hand someone a piece of paper. Simply. Without heat. Suvith's expression did something complex. He was not used to this. Not the content of what she was saying he had been told no before, formally, by Concord votes and diplomatic rejections. But the tone, the quality of it. She was not angry. She was not performing strength, the way the Keth performed strength, with volume and posture and the implication of consequences. She was simply answering his question, as if the answer were obvious, as if she had known what his question would be before he asked it, and had prepared the answer, and was now delivering it on schedule. By what right, he said, and his voice had gone lower and harder. Did humanity construct these weapons inside Concord space without a declaration of intent? The Concord Charter requires 10. We weren't in the Concord when we started, Solis said. Silence. Humanity joined the Concord 219 years ago. Construction on the first hull began 201 years ago, 18 years after accession. The Prest. You are correct that the Charter requires a declaration of intent for major military construction. We were in violation of that clause. TME. She said this without apology. She said it with the flat precision of a person reading from a technical document. However, she said, the Concord's response to the Fomalhaut incident which occurred before our accession, and which the Keth filed as an accidental navigation event and the Concord accepted without investigation, established a baseline for what we could expect from Concord enforcement mechanisms. We made a calculation. What calculation? Suveth said. That the Concord would forgive a rules violation more easily than a genocide. And the chamber was so quiet that the ambient hum of the translation systems was audible. We were right, she said. You vetted our trade agreements. You assessed our medical technology. You reviewed our colonization ethics. You sent cultural exchange delegations. You read our voting records and concluded we had evolved past conflict. A pause that had nothing comfortable in it. Nobody asked about the shipyards. We didn't lie. We answered every question we were asked. You did not ask the right ones. Suveth said nothing. Oren watched his face in the transmission image, watched the thing that was happening behind the eyes. Suveth was a creature who thought in acquisitions, in territories, in the vocabulary of a species that had expanded for so long by simply walking forward that it had never developed a complete picture of what it would mean to walk into something that did not move. He was developing that picture now. It looked like it hurt. The technical briefing ran for 4 more hours. Solis covered the Rampart fleet's capabilities with the economy of someone who has respect for the audience's time and no interest in theater. Weapons range, propulsion specifications, hull integrity under sustained bombardment, which was a calculation they had run many times and which produced numbers that the Concord's military analysts would spend 3 weeks checking and then confirming. The platforms could not be destroyed by any weapons system currently in operation in this region of the galaxy. Not because they were invincible in some absolute sense, but because destroying one would require a concentration of firepower that no single empire possessed, and doing that kind of damage to something 19,000 kilometers across would take time, and the 11 platforms would not give anyone time. She covered the manufacturing history, the gas giants, the techniques developed specifically to mask construction signatures from the Concord's standard survey systems, a branch of physics mass displacement field theory that humanity had invented and kept internal to the project for 160 years. She said it plainly. They had invented a physics discipline and told nobody. For 160 years. At the 5-hour mark, she took a single question from the floor. The Velhari delegate asked, "Why now? Why reveal this now?" Solis looked at her. "Because the Keth crossed the border," she said. "And because we are done waiting for the Concord to handle something the Concord has been failing to handle for 11 years. And if the Keth had not crossed the border?" Solis thought about this for a moment. A real moment, not a performed one. The kind of pause that meant the person was actually thinking rather than preparing to speak. "Then we would still be waiting," she said. "We are patient people." Oren found her in the corridor outside the chamber, after the session ended. He did not plan to approach her. He was moving toward the exit, toward the transit bay, toward his quarters, toward the private space where he could sit with everything he had just heard and try to build it into a shape he could carry. But she was standing near the water station. Of course, she was near the water station. Of course it was there, and she was alone. And he stopped. She looked at him. She knew who he was. He understood, with the specific clarity of a person who has just had a great many things reorganized inside his head, that she had always known who he was, that every human ambassador he had ever spoken to in that corridor had known exactly who he was and what he represented and what he would report. He said, "How many people knew?" "Enough to build it," she said. "Few enough to keep it. For 200 years. For 200 years. He looked at her. She poured her water. She looked like she needed it. "The Fomalhaut photograph," he said. "You opened with that." "Yes." "Why? You had the technical data. You had the fleet. You could have opened with the fleet." She drank her water. She was quiet for a moment. "Because I wanted them to understand the order," she said. "The photograph came first. The fleet came after. That's the correct sequence. If you show the fleet first, it looks like aggression. If you show Fomalhaut first, it looks like what it is." "What is it?" he asked. She looked at him with the tired, settled face of a woman who had spent 39 years answering a question that everyone else had stopped asking. "An answer," she said. She set her glass down and walked back toward the chamber. Unhurried. The way a person walks when the worst of the work is done, and what remains is only the long necessary work of finishing it. Oren stood at the water station alone. He thought about 61 names. He thought about 200 years. He thought about the size of a thing you had to build to make 61 names mean something to an empire that had filed them as an administrative incident. He did not pour himself any water. He walked to his quarters and sat down in the dark and started writing the report that he already knew would be the most important document of his career, and possibly of his life. And he did not know yet how to begin it, so he simply wrote the first true thing he could find. We were wrong about the humans. He looked at that sentence. He left it. It was, he thought, the right number of words for the moment. The Keth did not surrender after the 9th Vanguard disappeared. That surprised some people in the Concord. Not many of the people who had studied Keth history knew that the Empire had never once, in 600 years of recorded expansion, responded to a military setback by stopping. It responded by escalating. It was the only move it knew. When something pushed back, you pushed harder, because the alternative was to acknowledge that something existed which could push back. And the Keth strategic doctrine had no filed category for that. So they escalated. Suveth ordered the full mobilization of the Keth Imperial fleet within 48 hours of the Concord session. 4,000 ships, every combat vessel in active service, pulled from patrol routes, from colonial garrison duty, from the quiet, comfortable assignments that experienced crews got when the Empire was not actively expanding. He pulled them all and sent them to the Vreth Corridor, which was a 40 AU shipping lane that the Keth had controlled for 60 years, and which sat at the near edge of what used to be human border territory, and was now, technically, a war zone. 4,000 ships was the largest military assembly in this region of the galaxy in 300 years. It was a number designed to be looked at and understood immediately. 4,000 was not a patrol. 4,000 was not a survey fleet. 4,000 was a statement about the size of a thing and what the Keth intended to do with it. The RSP Immovable dropped out of transit 9 hours after the fleet finished assembling. Just the one ship. It came out of transit the way very large things move without urgency, without the quick repositioning of a vessel trying to find its angle. It simply arrived. It was there. The Vreth Corridor, which had been a 40 AU lane of open space for 60 years, was suddenly occupied in the way that a room is occupied when someone very large walks into it and stands in the middle. The Keth fleet commander, a 3-star called Tevath, who had been given this assignment because he was experienced and reliable, and because Suveth needed someone who would follow orders without asking the kind of questions that slow things down, opened a formal demand channel. He told the Immovable to withdraw from Keth-administered space or face military action. The Immovable did not respond. Tevath waited the protocol period. 14 minutes. Long enough to show patience, short enough to show seriousness. He had done this before. Most things, when told they were facing 4,000 ships, began the calculation that led to backing down. It was simple arithmetic. It almost always worked. He transmitted the demand again. The Immovable fired once. The weapon's discharge lasted approximately 3 seconds. It was not a beam, exactly not the focused point energy weapon that most species used at this scale. It was broader than that. It behaved more like weather than like a weapon, like a pressure front moving across a surface. Except the surface was space, and the pressure was enough to restructure it. The Vreth Corridor stopped existing, not the ships in it. The corridor itself, the stable gravitational lane that had made this particular stretch of space valuable for 60 years, the reliable path through a region of moderate gravitational complexity that had been the reason the Keth wanted this territory in the first place. The Immovable's weapons discharge destabilized the gravitational geometry of the lane so completely that what had been a clean navigational path became impassable debris field. It would take, the Concord's astrophysicists estimated later, approximately 400 years to restabilize naturally. The Keth lost no ships in this exchange. They lost the reason they had wanted the corridor. Tevath stared at his sensor display for a long time after this. He was not a man given to dramatic reactions. He had reached 3-star rank by being steady under pressure, by thinking clearly when things were loud and moving fast. He thought clearly now. He looked at what remained of the Vreth Corridor and he thought, this ship, fired once, and removed 60 years of strategic value from the map in 3 seconds. He transmitted his damage assessment to Suveth. Suveth's response arrived 12 minutes later. It said, advance, test the reload interval. Tevath sent 600 ships. He did not want to. He was a man who had reached 3-star rank, partly by knowing when a situation had changed shape and needed a different kind of response. But Suvath had given a direct order, and direct orders from the Grand Arbiter were not suggestions, and so Tivath sent 600 ships and watched his sensor display and waited. He was testing the reload interval because the logic was sound on its face. A weapon that large, that powerful, drawing that much energy, it could not be ready again immediately. There had to be a recovery period. A window. 6 seconds, 60 seconds, 6 minutes. It did not matter very much, which it was. What mattered was whether the window existed, because if it existed, then it could be exploited. And if it could be exploited, then 4,000 ships became a meaningful force again, rather than a very expensive audience. The immovable fired again at 6 seconds. 6 seconds after the first shot ended, it fired again. Different target. Same result. A Keth patrol formation of 40 ships not destroyed, moved, shoved sideways out of their formation by a force that treated 40 warships the way a large wave treats debris on a beach, repositioning them without particular interest in where they ended up. No ships destroyed. The Keth would realize later that this was deliberate, that the Rampart platforms, in the opening phase, were not trying to destroy ships. They were demonstrating there is a difference between a weapon that cannot discriminate and one that chooses not to. And the immovable was showing Tevath's fleet, and through Tevath, Suvath, and through Suvath, the galaxy which kind it was. The reload interval was 6 seconds. Tevath transmitted this to Suvath. He also transmitted his recommendation, which was immediate withdrawal and diplomatic engagement. He wrote it plainly. He said, "We are not in a fight. We are in a demonstration. The other side is showing us what it can do without doing all of it. And what it can do is enough." He sent it and waited. Suvath's response took longer this time. 22 minutes. Tevath counted them. The response did not address the recommendation. It ordered Tevath to identify vulnerabilities in the enemy platform's hull structure and prepare an assault plan for the full fleet. Tevath read the order. He thought about 6 seconds. He prepared the assault plan because he had been given a direct order, and he transmitted it to Suvath. And in a separate encrypted channel, he transmitted a private message to his second-in-command, telling her that, if anything happened to him in the next engagement, she was to take the fleet and reverse course immediately, and not wait for orders to do so. Then he waited to see what Suvath would do with the assault plan. While Tevath waited, the Concord received a transmission from the Rampart Fleet Command. It was addressed to the full Concord membership and to the Keth diplomatic channel simultaneously. It was from Admiral Solis. It was 4 paragraphs long. The first paragraph stated that the Terran Consolidated Defense had begun active military operations against the Keth Empire in response to 304 years of unresolved aggression, beginning with the Fomalhaut incident and continuing through 8 illegal territorial annexations. The second paragraph stated that the Rampart Fleet's operational objective was not territorial. Humanity was not claiming any Keth systems. It was not seeking reparations of land. The third paragraph listed the terms under which operations would cease. All occupied territories returned to their original governing bodies. Full financial reparations to all displaced populations. A public accounting in the Concord record of every Keth territorial action for the past 300 years. With the Fomalhaut incident listed first, with all 61 names attached. The fourth paragraph said that, until these terms were met, the Rampart fleet would continue operations. It said this, without any particular emphasis, the way you state a fact about weather. The Concord read this transmission several times in the hours after it arrived. Several members immediately began drafting responses. Several proposed emergency sessions. Several contacted the Keth diplomatic channel to encourage urgent compliance before the situation escalated further. The Solvani archivist who had given the presentation about humanity's voting record 3 years ago read the 4 paragraphs and then sat at her desk for a while, not doing anything in particular, looking at the middle distance. She had spent 15 years studying humans. She had written a well-regarded paper about their post-conflict orientation. She thought about that paper. She thought about the word orientation. She thought about whether she had meant it the way it turned out to be true. She had not. The war lasted 7 months. It was not, technically, a war. It never produced a formal declaration of war, which the Concord Charter required before any action could be given that designation. The humans did not file one because they were not asking the Concord's permission. The Keth did not file one because filing one would mean acknowledging that they were losing it. It was called, in the Concord's official documentation, an armed engagement of unresolved status, which was the kind of name that only a body very good at meetings could produce for something that killed people and ended in a surrender. In those 7 months, the Rampart fleet destroyed no planets, no civilian stations, and no inhabited structures of any kind. This was not an accident. The targeting protocols had been written into the platform software 200 years ago, when the project was first designed. Humanity had spent 2 centuries building weapons capable of geological damage and had programmed them, at the foundational level, not to use that capability on anything with people in it. The Keth found this confusing. They were accustomed to a certain logic of war, which was that the side with the larger weapon used it to its full potential. Restraint, in Keth military doctrine, was a thing you showed from a position of relative weakness, to avoid losing too much while negotiating. It was not something you showed from a position of total dominance. It did not make sense from that position. It made sense to humans. The platforms moved through Keth-adjacent space in the 2nd month, not attacking, simply present. The site of a structure 19,000 kilometers across holding position above a Keth colonial world did not require explanation. It was the explanation. 3 of the 7 Keth core systems went into what Tevath's reports called voluntary compliance, which was a military term for the thing a population does when it looks up at the sky and performs the relevant arithmetic. No shots fired at those 3 systems. Just presence. Just the long, patient fact of the thing sitting there. In the 4th month, the Concorde received a request from a Keth intelligence team to communicate with the crew of the RSP Unyielding, which was the smallest of the 11 platforms, and which had been stationed near the Keth 4th system blockade. The intelligence team's stated purpose was strategic assessment. Their actual purpose, which was legible to anyone reading the request carefully, was to find a human who was demoralized, to find the crack in the thing, to find the person who was tired, or scared, or having doubts, and use that person as a lever. The Unyielding connected them to its general communications channel. The crew member who answered was Lieutenant Priya Ose, 28 years old, born in Lagos, Earth. 6 years into her posting on the Unyielding, she answered from what appeared to be a break room. She was eating a sandwich of some kind. She had a cup of something beside her and she picked it up while the Keth intelligence team was introducing themselves and took a long drink from it without appearing to consider this impolite. The intelligence team told her, in formal language dressed in diplomatic softeners, that they were interested in understanding the human crew's perspective on the ongoing conflict and whether there was openness to discussing alternative resolutions. Priya Ose finished chewing. She said, "You mean do we want to stop?" They said, carefully, that they were open to exploring the conditions under which both sides might find a path toward mutual de-escalation. She said, "Our conditions are in the letter Admiral Solis sent in month 1. They haven't changed. Has something on your end changed?" The intelligence team said that the Keth Empire remained committed to its territorial positions. She said, "Then I'm not sure what we're talking about." She took another drink. "You're welcome to keep trying, though. I've got nowhere to be." The intelligence team filed a report after this conversation. The report said the interaction suggested high morale and strong ideological commitment among human crew personnel, and that psychological pressure tactics were unlikely to be effective, given apparent complete alignment between individual crew members and command objectives. One analyst on the team, younger, quieter, someone who had spent 3 years studying human cultural history before joining the intelligence service, added a marginal note on the filed copy of the report. The note said, "I don't think this is ideology. I think this is just what they're like." He did not submit that note through official channels. He kept his copy. He took it out, sometimes in the years after the war ended, and looked at it. He thought it was the most accurate intelligence assessment he had ever produced. In the 6th month, Suveth made contact with Solis directly, not through Tevath, not through the Concorde channel, not through any of the formal diplomatic structures that had been running in parallel with the military engagement. He contacted her through a private channel, flagged as Grand Arbiter, personal communication, which in Keth protocol meant it was not to be recorded or distributed. Solis recorded it. She distributed it to the Concorde after the armistice. She noted in the cover document that she had informed Suveth at the start of the call that she would do this, and that he had continued the call anyway, which she said she found interesting. He did not call it a surrender offer. He called it a mutual recognition of strategic reality. He used formal language and the careful structure of a Keth high caste communication, all the vocabulary of a civilization that had been in charge for so long that even its retreating sounded like advance. He said the Keth Empire was prepared to enter a period of de-escalation. He said certain territorial questions might be revisited through proper Concord channels. He said he believed a framework existed for both parties to preserve their essential interests. Then he attached a file. The file contained 61 names. His research division had found them. Original colonial registry records, 3 centuries old, pulled from the Fomalhaut station's pre-incident personnel manifest. He presented them as a gesture of good faith, as evidence that the Keth administration was prepared to engage seriously with the historical record. He said, "We acknowledge these individuals." Solis looked at the file. She did not respond for 4 days. The Keth read this as deliberation, as the necessary processing time for a significant diplomatic development. Tevath, who was still commanding the fleet with the careful steadiness of a man who had been given no new orders and intended to follow his old ones precisely, until told otherwise, transmitted to Suveth that the human fleet had made no new movements and that this seemed like a positive indicator. Suveth agreed. He told his council that the humans were considering his offer and that he expected a response shortly. His council agreed. They had not won anything yet, but they had found the language to describe stopping as something other than losing, which was, in the Keth understanding of things, most of the work. Solis was not deliberating. She had known what she was going to say before the call ended. She needed 4 days to be alone with 61 names without being an admiral about it, without the rank in the project and the 200 years and the 11 platforms sitting in the dark, to sit somewhere quiet and read the names and let them be what they were, which was 61 people who had been somewhere cold and far from home, doing work they believed in, and had not come back. She read each one. She said each one out loud, once, into the quiet of her private quarters on the Immovable's residential level, where the walls were plain and the light was low and there was no one to report to and nothing to present. Then she put the file away. She called Suveth back on the 5th day. She said, "Your terms are not our terms. Our terms have not changed." He said, "What do the humans want from this? You are not claiming territory. You are not seeking to govern. What is the point of all of this if not, we already have what we want," she said. Which is, she looked at something off-screen. He could not tell what. The recording captured only her face, which was the tired, settled face of a woman at the end of a very long job. "The Concorde has a public record," she said. "Everything that goes through Concorde channels stays there, permanently. Your filing of the Fomalhaut incident is in that record. The closed review is in that record. Your votes, your borders, your decisions, 300 years of them. When we file the counter record, the full accounting of every action, starting with 61 names that goes into, permanently. Whatever happens next, whatever the Keth does or doesn't do, those names are in the record. They are no longer an administrative incident, under review." Suveth said nothing. "That's what we have," she said. "That's what we came for." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "And the territorial demands? The reparations? Those are for the people you displaced, not for us. Fix what you broke. We'll verify that you fixed it. Then we'll leave." He wanted to ask something else. She could see it on his face, the thing he could not ask through official channels, the thing that did not fit the vocabulary of a grand arbiter. He wanted to ask whether it was really about 61 names, whether a species had truly spent 2 centuries building 11 planet-sized warships because an administrative review never concluded. She would have told him yes. She would have said, "We are patient people, but we do not forget, and the 2 things together are more dangerous than you knew." He did not ask. He agreed to full terms 31 days later. Every occupied system returned. Full reparations filed with the Concorde. The public accounting published in the Concorde record with Fomalhaut listed first and all 61 names in the opening paragraph, and underneath them, without comment, the names of every person lost in 7 months of engagement on both sides. The list was longer than 61 now. Solis read every name on the new edition, too. She read them the same way out loud. Once, in the quiet of her quarters. Then she filed her operational closeout report, which was 14 pages of technical summary and 2 sentences of personal statement, and she went to the observation deck of the immovable and looked out at the stars for a while, and she thought, the theory was wrong, but the answer was right, and she was not sure what to do with the distance between those two things. She stood there for a long time. She did not reach any conclusions. She went to bed. The Concorde documentation mission was Oren Vey's idea. He had proposed it 3 weeks after the armistice was signed, in a written memo to the Concorde's Cultural and Historical Commission, which was the body responsible for maintaining the official record of significant events. The memo said that the Rampart fleet represented the most consequential military development in this region of the galaxy in 3 centuries, and that the Concorde had both an institutional obligation and a historical duty to document it properly. It said that proper documentation required direct access. It said that a senior diplomatic representative should be permitted to visit the fleet, tour the facilities, and produce a first-hand account to sit alongside the technical briefings and sensor data that already existed in the record. The commission approved it in 48 hours, which was fast for the Concorde. Oren suspected they approved it quickly because nobody else wanted to go. He understood that. He had watched the reactions in the chamber when Solis put up the scale diagram. He had watched the involuntary sounds people made when they read the measurement bar. There was a specific kind of vertigo that came from encountering something that broke your sense of proportion, not just surprised you, but fundamentally altered the spatial grammar you used to understand the world. Most of the delegates were still processing that vertigo from a comfortable distance. They were not in a hurry to stand next to the thing that caused it. Oren wanted to stand next to it. He was not sure why, exactly. He was 63 years old, and had spent 4 decades in diplomatic work that had trained him to understand things at a remove, through reports, through briefings, through the mediated language of formal communication. He had been understanding the Rampart fleet at a remove for 3 weeks now. The understanding sat in his head like a fact he had memorized without quite believing. He needed the thing itself. He needed to put his body in proximity to it and let his body confirm what his mind kept questioning. The Terran Consolidated Defense approved his request in 6 days. He boarded his transit vessel, a Thailand long hauler, the same class he had traveled in for 40 years, reliable and comfortable, and sized for a species with 6 limbs, and a strong preference for having enough room, and set out for the coordinates where the Rampart fleet was holding station. He had been in transit alongside the immovable for 6 hours before the briefing materials told him the ship had come into sensor range. He went to the viewport. The immovable filled it. Not partially, not mostly, completely. All 6 viewports on the long hauler's observation deck, fore to aft, top to bottom. The immovable filled every one of them, as if the glass had been painted over with a surface that was gray and structured, and went on in every direction past the edge of sight. Oren stood at the main viewport and looked, and his brain kept trying to resolve what it was seeing into something it already had a category for. A wall, a cliff face, a very large station. It kept failing. The scale defeated every comparison before the comparison could finish forming. He had known the number. 19,200 kilometers. He had read it many times. He had looked at diagrams. He had seen the Concorde scale model, which was itself the size of a building and had been constructed specifically to help member species process the proportions. None of that was the same as this. He stood at the viewport for a long time. He thought, there are people inside that. People who ate sandwiches and slept and had opinions about things. People who had gotten up every morning for years and gone to their stations and done their work inside something that, from the outside, looked like geology. He thought, and none of them told anyone. He had to sit down after a while. Not because he was frightened, though there was something in the vicinity of fear moving around in his chest. Because his legs had decided that standing required more confidence than he currently had access to. Solis met him at the docking collar. She was in her uniform, plain gray, the same as always. She looked like herself, which was to say she looked like a woman who had put down something very heavy not long ago and was still deciding what to do with her hands. She looked slightly more tired than the last time he had seen her, which he had not thought was possible. She shook his hand. The human gesture. He had learned it decades ago and performed it without thinking. Her grip was firm and brief. She said, "How was the transit?" He said, "Long." She nodded. She turned and led him into the ship. The corridor was wide enough to fit a parliament building. He knew this because the Thailand Parliament building was a structure he had walked through many times. And as he walked through the immovable's main access corridor, he found himself automatically measuring it against that familiar interior. The way the brain uses known spaces to calibrate unknown ones. The Parliament building's grand hall, the central space that tourists visited, that school groups had their photographs taken in, that had appeared in the background of 1,000 official government images, would have fit in this corridor without touching the walls, with room on both sides. With room on both sides. The ceiling was high enough that lights had been installed at 3 different levels, because one level of lighting could not reach the floor from the top. He walked beside Solis and said nothing for a while. The sound of his footsteps was very small. "How many people are stationed on this ship?" he asked. 42,000, she said. "That's not very many. For something this size. It doesn't need many people to run. Most of it is systems. Automated. The crew is here because systems need people to catch what they miss. And to make decisions," he said. "And to make decisions," she agreed. They walked. The corridor branched and rebranched. She led him with the ease of a person navigating a space they knew in their bones, not thinking about the route, just going. He watched the walls as they moved. The construction of this ship had consumed the core of a planet. He was walking through the result of that consumption. It felt like the inside of a mountain that had been given purpose, that had been organized into rooms and systems and corridors, because someone had decided that the raw material of a world could be made into something that moved. He thought about the people who had built this, not the engineering teams, the idea. The person, 200 years ago, who had stood somewhere and thought, "We need to build something that cannot be answered," and had not announced it, had not filed it with the Concord, had not sought permission or approval or consensus, had simply begun. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You're here to ask things. When you were 22, when you were first recruited, did you understand what it was going to be?" She walked for a moment before answering. "I understood it was big," she said. "I understood it was long. The man who recruited me said we were building something that would take a while." She paused. "I didn't know how long until I had been in it for a few years and started to understand the scope. And then I kept going." "Why?" She glanced at him, not annoyed by the question, thinking about it. "Because someone had to," she said, "and because I was already there." It was not a complicated answer. It was not a speech. He had expected something larger, something that matched the scale of the corridor they were walking through. He had expected the explanation to be as big as the thing it explained. It wasn't. She had kept going because someone had to, and she was already there. 39 years. The same reason anyone does the long, necessary work of anything. Not glory. Not certainty. Just, someone has to. And I am here. And so I will. He walked beside her and thought about that for a long time. She took him to the observation deck. It was on the outer surface of the ship, which at this scale meant it was a room with a very large window that looked out at the stars, the same stars you could see from anywhere, unchanged, indifferent to the fact that the thing you were standing inside was larger than many of them had planets. Below the observation deck and below meant down the curve of the hull. 300 kilometers of gray structured surface before you reached open space was a wall. He had been told about the wall. It was in the technical briefing documents. A memorial surface, 2 kilometers long, mounted on the outer hull of the immovable, at a latitude visible from the main observation deck. The names were too small to read from here. He could see the surface a slightly different color from the surrounding hull. A panel that had been installed with a different purpose than the rest of the structure. But the individual names were beyond his vision at this distance. He knew there were 61 at the top. He knew there were more below them. He stood at the window and looked at it for a while. "The names that were added after the armistice," he said. "The crew voted?" "Unanimously," she said. "There was no debate about it. Your people and theirs together." "Yes." He thought about that. A wall on the outside of a warship, in the cold of space, carrying the names of the people on both sides of the thing the ship had been built to end. He thought about who had built this ship and why. He thought about the distance between building something and using it, and the grief that lived in that distance. The theory, he said. He had been carrying the phrase since she said it in the corridor after the armistice. You said the theory was wrong. She looked at the wall. The theory was deterrence, she said. You build something big enough, present enough, patient enough, and you never have to use it. The existence of the thing is the argument. Nobody reaches for a confrontation they know they cannot survive. That's a reasonable theory. It is. It works in most models. The Keth broke it because the Keth didn't know about the thing. You can't be deterred by something you don't know exists. She was quiet for a moment. So the theory was wrong, or the implementation was wrong, or both. And, could you have told us earlier? Shown the fleet before it came to this? She thought about it. A real thought, not a performance of one. Maybe, she said. If we had revealed the fleet 20 years ago, the Keth might have pulled back. Might have stopped at 6 systems instead of 8. But the Concorde would have moved immediately to restrict the fleet. Decommission it. Probably. Or place it under joint command, which is the same thing in practice. She turned slightly from the window. The only reason the fleet exists is that nobody knew about it. The moment it was known, it would have been managed. And managed means dismantled. You don't trust the Concorde. I trust the Concorde to do what it does, which is manage, which is find the compromise position between the thing that is right and the thing that is easy. She paused. 61 people didn't get a compromise position. He did not argue with that. He looked at the wall on the hull. The names he could not read from here. What happens to the fleet now? He asked. It stays, she said. The platforms stay. We're not decommissioning them. The Concorde will want a great many things, she said. We'll see what we can do. He heard Calder's voice in it. The same tone. The same patience. The phrase that had followed him through 40 years of corridors and water stations and now stood here with him inside the largest weapon ever constructed in this part of the galaxy. And it meant the same thing it had always meant. We know more than we are saying. We are moving toward something. Ask us when we're ready. He turned away from the window. He looked at her. She was still looking at the hull wall, at the small rectangle of different color, 300 kilometers below them, that he could not read from here. Are you glad it's over? He asked. She thought about that for a long time. I'm glad it's done, she said. Those aren't the same thing. He waited to see if she would say more. She did not. She kept looking at the wall. He understood that he was not going to get more than that. Not because she was hiding something, but because that was all there was. Glad it was done. Not glad in the way of a victory. Not proud in the way of a person who has been proved right. Just the quiet and complicated feeling of a thing being finished that needed to be finished, which is its own kind of peace and its own kind of grief, and the two are not always easy to separate. He stayed at the window a while longer. Then he went to the room he had been assigned to crew quarters, a small plain room with a bunk and a desk and a viewport that looked out at the stars. And he sat at the desk and opened a blank document and started writing. He wrote for 3 days. The technical summary came first. It was thorough and careful, and he was a good diplomat, and it showed in the work structured, cited, precise. The kind of document the Concorde's Historical Commission could file and reference and quote in formal contexts for the next 4 centuries. Then he wrote the military assessment. Then, the geopolitical forecast. He wrote about the armistice terms, about the Keth's compliance with the reparations schedule, which had begun and which he assessed as likely to hold because the Keth were nothing if not procedural and Suveth had, whatever else he was, signed his name to an agreement in the Concorde's permanent record, and the Keth did not break things they had signed in the permanent record. He wrote about the Rampart fleet's future status, about the Concorde's ongoing conversations with the Terran government, about oversight and transparency going forward, about the new protocols being written for construction monitoring, for military disclosure, for the particular gap in the charter that humanity had spent 200 years quietly living inside, about the 15-member species who had, in the weeks since the armistice, opened quiet private channels with the Terran government to ask about propulsion technology and mass displacement field theory, and whether humanity would consider sharing certain developments with the broader community. He wrote about all of it. He wrote well. Then he came to the section at the end of the document marked Cultural Observations. He had filled this section in 312 reports over 40 years. It was the section where diplomats put the soft material, the impressions, the things that did not fit in the technical categories but that mattered anyway, the texture of a civilization that you could not fully capture in data. He had written about Keth, ceremonial dress, about Solvani greeting protocols, about the particular way the Velhari expressed disagreement, which was through a pattern of polite questions that you had to learn to read correctly, or you thought they were agreeing with you, until suddenly they weren't. He sat for a while looking at the blank space under the cultural observations heading. He thought about Calder at the water station, about Senna's small smile in the corridor, about Solis walking in through the side door, about a 22-year-old engineer being told they were building something and it would take a while and saying yes. He thought about 42,000 people living inside something larger than a planet, doing their work, keeping their secret, eating their sandwiches, watching the stars through viewports in corridors wide enough for parliaments. He thought about patience as a weapon, about silence as a strategy, about the difference between a species that was done with war and a species that had decided, very carefully, how and when and why it would fight one. He wrote one paragraph. He wrote it slowly. He rewrote it twice. He looked at it for a long time when he was done. It said, "The human species does not broadcast its intentions. This is not deception. It is architecture. They build the conclusion before they announce the premise." The galaxy interpreted their silence as the absence of capacity. It was, in fact, the presence of will. I do not know what they are building now. I do not think any of us will until it is already done. He read it back. He submitted the report. He closed his document and sat for a while at the desk in his small plain room, looking out the viewport at the stars that went on past seeing in every direction, unchanged and indifferent. The same stars that had been there when 61 people died at Fomalhaut, the same stars that had looked down on 200 years of quiet work in the shadows of gas giants, the same stars that would be there long after everything that had happened here was deep history and somebody else's problem. He thought, I have spent 40 years watching humans, and I understood almost none of it. He thought, and they knew that. The whole time they knew exactly what I understood and what I didn't. And they were patient about it, and they did not correct me. And now, here we all are. He put his hand flat on the desk. The desk was made of something he did not recognize, not metal, not any composite he knew. He had not thought to ask what it was made of. He thought about asking Solis the next morning. Then he thought about where the material had come from, and decided he already knew the answer. Mars. He was sitting at a desk made from the core of a dismantled planet, inside a ship that was built from the same source, and the ship was the size of the planet that used to be there before someone decided it was more useful as an answer. He sat in that room for a long time. He did not sleep well. He did not think he was going to sleep well for quite some time. Outside his viewport, the stars did not move. They just stayed there, the way they always had, burning and enormous and patient, in the way that only things which have existed for billions of years can be patient without effort, without intention, simply enduring. He thought, the humans would understand that. He thought, the humans have always understood that. He turned off the light and lay in the dark and listened to the deep, nearly silent hum of a ship that never stopped running, 42,000 people moving through it somewhere above and below and around him like blood, through something vast and alive. And he tried to sleep. And after a long while, he did.